Authorities say at least 19 people have died in a suicide bombing at an education centre in Kabul. Authorities say at least 19 people have died in a suicide bombing at an education centre in Kabul. Police say the attack in the west of the Afghan capital came as students were preparing for an exam. Dozens of people have been injured. There's been no claim of responsibility. Journalist Ali Latifi is following events in the Afghan capital. He gave us this update.
The attack took place early in the morning in what would essentially be the equivalent of a testing center for the GRE or the SAT. So you're talking about high school age children and a little bit older who are preparing for the college entrance exam. And if you look at the footage that's been submitted online, you can tell that whoever was planning this attack clearly targeted it to have the most civilian casualties, because you're talking about people who were sitting taking practice tests in classrooms, crowds of people who didn't have an easy way out.
In the streets of Afghanistan's capital to condemn recent attacks targeting the Shia Hazara ethnic minority. The demonstrators call the attacks genocide, and the latest one happened yesterday. A suicide bomber blew himself up in a Kabul study hall as hundreds of students, mostly young Hazara women, were taking university tests. At least 35 people were killed and dozens more were wounded. No one has claimed responsibility. Let's dig a little bit deeper into this story with journalist Bilal Sarwari, who's following the story for us here in Canada. Bilal, good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again.
Bilal, as much as you know at this point, what exactly happened at that study hall yesterday?
Well, according to the management of the Kaj Higher Education Center, a suicide attacker used one of the doors allocated for girls, and he detonated his, vest inside the massive classroom that had the capacity for 700 students, but there were around 400 students, mostly young girls. This was a mock university entrance exam, and the attack basically left dozens of students killed and dozens more wounded. The ambulances arrived quite late, so everyone tried to take those wounded to nearby hospitals. And this is, again, the same area in West Kabul that's home to Shias and Hazaras that have been frequently targeted in these brutal attacks over the last 12 months since the Taliban have taken over, but also before that when the Republic was there in power. And one feels so sorry, Natasha, for Hazaras and Shias for getting attacked just because they're Shias and Hazaras.
And talk to me about who are the people who lost their lives. What do we know of them?
Well, these are mostly young students from central provinces of Bamiyan and Daikundi, but also Ghazni, where parents from poor communities are sending their girls and boys for a better future in Kabul. And time and again, the only thing that parents get back are coffins traveling to very, very remote villages in Afghanistan. And these would have been the future doctors and engineers for Afghanistan. These parents are willing to send their children to study at a time of economic hardship, but also at a time when the Taliban have banned girls from getting secondary education. And we do see time and again that the Taliban simply lack a security strategy, one that can prevent these sort of attacks from taking place. And one has to really feel sorry for Afghanistan's Hazara and Shia communities that have been frequently targeted.
Bilal, who do you think is responsible for this? I understand no one has yet claimed responsibility.
Well, in the past, the Islamic State has carried these sort of attacks, both under the Republic and under the Taliban for the last 12 months. The question is, why are the Taliban failing as the de facto rulers to prevent these sort of attacks from taking place? Because if you listen to the Taliban, they say, we have brought peace. There's no security issues in Afghanistan, and that the Islamic State is not a threat. But the reality is that the Taliban are facing a deadly insurgency, and Afghanistan's Shia and Hazara communities are calling for better protection. And they're saying, when will these attacks stop? because we are extremely vulnerable.
But
One has
Bilal,
to also
Bilal, forgive me, better protection from whom? The Taliban's running the show. They were already hostile to Shias, already hostile to Hazaras, already hostile to women, and hostile to education. Who's going to help these people?
Well, that's the irony, isn't it? That the Taliban still have suicide squads under their interior and defense ministries. They call them the martyrdom seeker battalions. And the Taliban have also been carrying out suicide attacks over the last 20 years. But today, the reality for 40 million Afghans is that the Taliban are the rulers in Afghanistan. They have had a military takeover. And what we do see over the last 1 year, the Taliban have failed miserably on the security front, on the economy front, on many different fronts. And the Taliban today are failing to be, governing Afghanistan. They may have been better fighters, and the truth is that they're failing in terms of policing the streets of Kabul, but also other major cities like Herat in the west and elsewhere.
What do you anticipate is going to come of these latest set of protests that we're seeing, again, by young women demanding some decent standard of living within Afghanistan?
Well, what we have seen over the last 12 months is this crackdown by the Taliban against the Afghan women, but also against the Afghan people. The Taliban simply do not want to see anyone, demonstrating. The Taliban continue to paint a picture that Afghanistan is all good under their rule. And what we have to remember again, sadly, that the Taliban have continuously denied to allow millions of girls to study in secondary schools. They say there are cultural issues, sometimes they say there are other problems, but the reality is that this is a deep ideological opposition. And these contradictions, these different stances from Taliban are costing millions of Afghan girls their future.
Bilal Sarbari joining us from Mississauga, Ontario. Thank you.